This is Carrasquiera. It's a small fishing village about 100 kilometers south of Lisbon, and I've come here today to shoot long exposures. Now, for as long as I've been doing landscape photography, I've been coming to this location because it's just such a fantastic place to shoot long exposures. It's got these really old rickety wooden piers which just make such a fantastic subject at sunset, and of course it's surrounded by all this water, which is an incredibly wide estuary. Now, why that particularly works as long exposures is because these water, they've got a lot of ripples on them, they've got a lot of highlights, there's a lot of visual noise there. So if we do a long exposure, something like 30 seconds, a minute, something like that, what that's going to do is just blur all the water and completely smooth it out and give it this kind of abstract milky effect, which really will focus the eye on the piers and things like that, the wooden texture and the shape and form and line of the pier just after the sunset's gone down into the horizon. Now, I've always really liked long exposures. I've always kind of liked that abstract look that they give to images. They particularly work well when you've got a lot of clouds going on in the sky, because they'll blur the clouds as well, and unfortunately that's not the case. It's February here in Lisbon and we've just got crystal clear blue skies. It's a lovely day, but I think the location's strong enough, and I think with the tide being high like it is and with the fantastic light that we're getting, we should be able to still make a pretty interesting image. Now, when shooting long exposures, there are a couple of things that you're always going to need. The first of these is a tripod like this, because what's going to happen is the camera shutter is going to be open. Like I said, it's something like in here, about 15 seconds to 30 seconds, and the camera can't move during that exposure. So I need to have it attached to a tripod so it's completely secure and doesn't move at all. I'm also going to use one of these. This is a cable release, a remote cable release, so I can fire the shutter of the camera without touching the camera, because if I touch the camera, there's always a danger that I'm going to move it a little bit, which is going to blur the image in places that I don't want it to be blurred. If you don't have a cable release, what you can do is set the timer on your camera to 2 seconds or 5 seconds, so you press the shutter and then after 2 seconds the camera takes the image itself. That's okay for a location like this, but if you're trying to time the image around kind of moving waves or things like that, you really need to have a cable release. Now, another thing that's essential is this. This is a neutral density filter. What this is it's a piece of very dark glass, and what this does is it reduces the amount of light that's going to come into the camera and hit the sensor. And because it reduces the amount of light that comes into the camera, you're going to have to basically open up the shutter to have a much longer shutter time to get the same amount of light into the sensor that you would if you didn't have this. So basically, to put it short, put this on the front of the camera and it forces the camera to use a much longer exposure. Now, you can get these in different strengths. You can get them in 3 stops, you can get them in 6 stops. This is a 6 stop. You can get them in 10, 15, even 20 stops. I'm going to use a 6 stop today. It's probably not going to be quite strong enough. I'd probably be better off with a 10 stop, but I'm going to wait until the sun's gone just under the horizon and then put this on and see if I can get an exposure of about 30 seconds to a minute. And the final thing that I'm going to use is this. Now, this is the neutral density graduated filter, and why this one's different from the other one is this is dark at the top but not at the bottom. So that's because generally when you're shooting exposures like this, the sky is brighter than what's in the bottom half of the image, the water, things like the pier. So what this does is it darkens down the sky, so that's not going to blow out. It's going to stop the highlights of the sky from just turning white, but it's not going to have any effect on the bit below the darkened part. So I'll put the line here across the horizon, and the bottom part of it will be not touched at all, and we'll have the same kind of exposure as if I weren't using this. So it's about 45 minutes until the sunset, so I'm just going to sit and hang around, play around with composition, and then just when the sun's gone down underneath the horizon, I'll start shooting. So first I'm going to look at the composition and trying to keep the edge of the frames as clean as possible. Make sure there's nothing touching the edge of the frame like these piers here on the left. So I'll move the camera over a little bit to the right and make sure the horizon's not right across the center of the picture. I'll just put it on a third. And then after screwing the filter holder onto the front of the camera, I'm going to look at exposure. Now, all the exposure settings on the camera are left in manual. So I've got ISO at its lowest. I've got the aperture somewhere between f8 and f16 to give me as much depth of field as possible. And then I'm just going to manipulate the shutter speed to try, depending on how much light there is and the filter that I've got on. Now, at the moment, the shutter speed, the camera's telling me that it's 1/15 of a second. Now, I've got a 6-stop filter to go on the front of that, so I need to add 6 stops onto that shutter time. Now, you can do that in a variety of different ways. You can look on apps and things like that, or some filters have got a card which tell you exactly how long the shutter time would be. Well, basically, you can just do in your head, which is what I do. So for each stop, you just need to double the shutter speed. So 1/15, double that gives me 1/8, double again a quarter, and then a half a second, 1 second, 2 seconds, and finally 4 seconds. And that's what the shutter time is on this image. But you can see the water hasn't really blurred very much. I need a slightly longer shutter time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wait for a little bit longer, wait for it's a little bit later and a little bit darker, and then try again. It's a little bit later now. The sun went down about 25 minutes ago, and it's a fair bit darker, so I should be able to get a longer shutter time. The camera's telling me that the base exposure is 2 seconds. So with my 6-stop filter, I need to double that 6 times. So that's 2 seconds, 4 seconds, 8, 15, 30, 1 minute, and finally a long exposure of 2 minutes. So I'll just dial 2 minutes into the camera and leave that to see how that comes out. And this is it. You can see the 2 minutes has really blurred the water, and it was still plenty of color in the sky. Now, ideally it would be much better if I'd had some cloud action going on, something a little bit more interesting in the sky. But overall, that's not bad. So that's it for this video. It's been quite short, but hopefully it's been useful. If there's anything you're not sure about, just drop me a comment and I'll get right back to you. And if you'd like to join me shooting on a workshop this year, I'd love to have you along. Please check out my website. They've gone to some fantastic places this year. And as always, thanks for watching and take care.